Well, ENCA's UK correspondent, Oli Bereda, is in Brussels right now with the very latest. Oli, good to have you, and welcome to the Upfront. I mean, I understand that, of course, Britain, France, Germany, including Italy, will be in discussion today. This with regards to Iraq, as well as the tensions between them and the United States. What can we expect to be perhaps the messaging from that particular meeting?
Certainly European nations are scrambling to try and make sure that they can have a meaningful response to this crisis. Here in Brussels, we did hear from Ursula von der Leyen earlier, the new president of the European Commission. The European Union's position is very much that there should be no more escalation of this crisis, that restraint should be exercised. We heard from Ursula von der Leyen earlier that no efforts would be spared as well in trying to keep alive the Iran nuclear deal of 2015, and she said that the use of weapons must stop now. So the Europeans do feel that they can play a role in trying to de-escalate this crisis, but there's also concern here in Brussels and in other European capitals that in a sense it doesn't matter much what the Europeans say, that Donald Trump, the US president, will act in the way he sees fit, the way he wishes, and that perhaps Donald Trump, the US president, this current occupant of the White House, doesn't pay a huge amount of attention to what is said here in Brussels anyway. But the Europeans are trying to make an impact on this crisis and try and de-escalate the crisis rather than see further escalations now.
Well, of course, I'm not sure if that would put anyone at ease, but I mean, with regards to Europe, in terms of their perspective from what Iraq is saying, they have said they have no plans whatsoever to escalate the matter, but they do plan to defend itself if necessary. I mean, does that ease the European Union at all, or does it further just keeps, the EU worried?
The EU is very worried indeed about this crisis and wants to show that it can have an impact, and certainly it has an invitation for the Iranian Foreign Minister, Mr. Zarif, to come to Brussels whenever he wants to hold talks here about the tension that we are seeing in the Middle East. We haven't yet seen his arrival here. We don't know whether he will turn up in the coming days or not. Certainly in London, where Ursula von der Leyen has now moved on from Brussels for talks with Boris Johnson, the British Prime Minister, they will also be discussing, as well as Brexit, the real reason that she has gone there. They'll be discussing the crisis in Iran as well, and certainly also looking, as I mentioned earlier, at the Iran nuclear deal of 2015, which you'll remember the Americans pulled out of in 2018, but which European powers have been trying to keep alive. Now, the Iranians have said since that airstrike in Iraq last week that they would be stepping back even further from the Iran nuclear deal of 2015, but the Europeans are insistent that it is not completely dead yet. We've been hearing from London in recent days that Britain still believes that the Iran nuclear deal is the best way of keeping tensions lowered in the Middle East, and the best way of avoiding Iran from achieving a nuclear weapon. So that illustrates some difference, a gap between Europe and the Americans on all of this. We haven't seen the Europeans come out and too strongly criticise the United States for the action that it took in Iraq last week, but they are certainly very concerned indeed, and they do not want to see any further escalation. The real hope here in Brussels and in other European capitals is that the missile strikes we saw carried out on Iraq, on American and coalition bases there, will be the last time we see an escalation in this particular iteration of this crisis between Iran and the United States. Will the Americans respond, or will the Americans consider that they can now let this one go and that contentions be dampened down a little bit? Or a huge amount now rests on the response from the United States and what Donald Trump decides that he wants to do next.
Indeed, as much as the European Commission have called for an end in the use of weapons, we'll have to wait whether the US President Donald Trump will listen. But Oli Bereda, thank you so much for that update live from Brussels.